File 7 of Farthest North, Volume 1. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sharon Riskadal. Farthest North by Fridtjof Nansen, Volume 1. Chapter 5. Voyage through the Kara Sea, Part 1. It was well into the night after Kristoffersen and Trondheim had left us before we could get away. The channel was too dangerous for us to risk it in the thick fog. But it cleared a little, and the petroleum launch was got ready. I had determined to go on ahead with it and take soundings. We started about midnight. Nansen stood in the bow with the lead line. First we bore over towards the point of Vygots to the northwest, as Palander directs, then on through the strait, keeping to the Vygot side. The fog was often so thick that it was with difficulty we could catch a glimpse of the Fram, which followed close behind us, and on board the Fram they could not see our boat. But so long as we had enough water, and so long as we saw that they were keeping to the right course behind us, we went ahead. Soon the fog cleared again a little, but the depth was not quite satisfactory. We had been having steadily 4½ to 5 fathoms, then it dropped to 4, and then to 3½. This was too little. We turned and signaled to the Fram to stop. Then we held farther out from land and got into deeper water, so that the Fram could come on again at full speed. From time to time our petroleum engine took to its old tricks and stopped. I had to pour in more oil to set it going again, and as I was standing doing this, the boat gave a lurch, so that a little oil was spilt and took fire. The burning oil ran over the bottom of the boat, where a good deal had been spilt already. In an instant the whole stern was in a blaze, and my clothes, which were sprinkled with oil, caught fire. I had to rush to the bow, and for a moment the situation was a critical one, especially as a big pail that was standing full of oil also took fire. As soon as I had stopped the burning of my clothes, I rushed aft again, seized the pail, and poured the flaming oil into the sea, burning my fingers badly. At once the whole surface of the water round was in flames. Then I got hold of the bailer and bailed water into the boat as hard as I could, and soon the worst was over. Things had looked anything but well from the Fram, however, and they were standing by with ropes and buoys to throw to us. Soon we were out of Ugor Strait. There was now so little fog that the low land round us was visible, and we could also see a little way out to sea, and in the distance all drift ice. At 4 o'clock in the morning, August 4th, we glided past Solokai, or Hawk Island, out into the dreaded Kara Sea. Now our fate was to be decided. I had always said that if we could get safely across the Kara Sea and past Cape Chelyuskin, the worst would be over. Our prospects were not bad, an open passage to the east along the land as far as we could see from the masthead. An hour and a half later we were at the edge of the ice. It was so close that there was no use in attempting to go on through it. To the northwest it seemed much looser, and there was a good deal of blue in the atmosphere at the horizon there. We kept southeast along the land through broken ice, but in the course of the day went further out to sea, the blueness of the atmosphere to the east and northeast promising more open water in that direction. However, about 3 p.m. the ice became so close that I thought it best to get back into the open channel along the land. It was certainly possible that we might have forced our way through the ice in the sea here, but also possible that we might have stuck fast, and it was too early to run this risk. Next morning, August 5th, being then off the coast near the mouth of the river Kara, we steered across towards Hjalmar. We soon had that low land in sight, but in the afternoon we got into fog and close ice. Next day it was no better, and we made fast to a great ice block which was lying stranded off the Hjalmar coast. In the evening some of us went on shore. The water was so shallow that our boat stuck fast a good way from the beach, and we had to wade. It was a perfectly flat, smooth sand beach, covered by the sea at full tide, and beyond that a steep sand bank, 30 to 40 feet, in some places probably 60 feet high. We wandered about a little. Flat, bare country on every hand. Any driftwood we saw was buried in the sand and soaking wet. Not a bird to be seen except one or two snipe. We came to a lake, and out of the fog in front of me I heard the cry of a loon, but saw no living creature. Our view was blocked by a wall of fog whichever way we turned. There were plenty of reindeer tracks, but of course they were only those of the Samoyeds' tame reindeer. This is the land of the Samoyeds, and oh, but it is desolate and mournful. The only one of us that bagged anything was the botanist. Beautiful flowers smiled to us here and there among the sand mounds, the one message from a brighter world in this land of fogs. We went far in over the flats, but came only to sheets of water with low spits running out into them, and ridges between. We often heard the cry of loons on the water, but could never catch sight of one. All these lakelets were of a remarkable, exactly circular conformation, with steep banks all round, just as if each had dug out a hole for itself in the sandy plain. With the oars of our boat and a large tarpaulin we had made a sort of tent. We were lucky enough to find a little dry wood, and soon the tent was filled with the fragrant odor of hot coffee. When we had eaten and drunk and our pipes were lit, Johansen, in spite of fatigue and a full meal, surprised us by turning one somersault after another on the heavy damp sand in front of the tent in his long military cloak and sea-boots half full of water. By 6:30 next morning we were on board again. The fog had cleared, but the ice, which lay drifting backwards and forwards according to the set of the tide, looked as close as ever towards the north. During the morning we had a visit from a boat with two stalwart Samoyeds, who were well received and treated to food and tobacco. They gave us to understand that they were living in a tent some distance inland and farther north. Presently they went off again, enriched with gifts. These were the last human beings we met. Next day the ice was still close, and as there was nothing else to be done, some of us went ashore again in the afternoon, partly to see more of this little-known coast, and partly, if possible, to find the Samoyeds' camp and get hold of some skins and reindeer flesh. It is a strange, flat country, nothing but sand, sand everywhere. Still flatter, still more desolate than the country about Ugor Strait, with a still wider horizon. Over the plain lay a green carpet of grass and moss, here and there spoiled by the wind having torn it up and swept sand over it. But trudge as we might and search as we might, we found no Samoyed camp. We saw 3 men in the far distance, but they went off as fast as they could the moment they caught sight of us. There was little game, just a few ptarmigan, golden plovers, and long-tailed ducks. Our chief gain was another collection of plants and a few geological and geographical notes. Our observations showed that the land at this place was charted not less than half a degree or 36 to 38 minutes too far west. It was not till next afternoon, August 9th, that we went on board again. The ice to the north now seemed to be rather looser, and at 8 p.m. we at last began once more to make our way north. We found ice that was easy to get through, and held on our course until 3 days later we got into open water. On Sunday, August 18th, we stood out into the open Kara Sea, past the north point of Hjalmar and Beløy Ostrov, White Island. There was no ice to be seen in any direction. During the days that followed we had constant strong east winds, often increasing to half a gale. We kept on tacking to make our way eastward, but the broad and keel-less Fram can hardly be called a good beater. We made too much leeway, and our progress was correspondingly slow. In the journal there is a constantly recurring entry of headwind, headwind. The monotony was extreme, but as they may be of interest as relating to the navigation of this sea, I shall give the most important items of the journal, especially those regarding the state of the ice. On Monday, August 14th, we beat with only sail against a strong wind. Single pieces of ice were seen during the middle watch, but after that there was none within sight. Tuesday, August 15th. The wind slackened in the middle watch. We took in sail and got up steam. At 5 in the morning we steamed away east over a sea perfectly clear of ice. But after midday the wind began to freshen again from east-northeast, and we had to beat with steam and sail. Single floes of ice were seen during the evening and night. Wednesday, August 16th. As the Kara Sea seemed so extraordinarily free from ice, and as a heavy sea was running from the northeast, we decided to hold north as far as we could, even if it should be to the Einsamkeit lonely island. But about 3:30 in the afternoon we had a strip of close ice ahead, so that we had to turn. Stiff breeze and sea. Kept on beating east along the edge of the ice. Almost lost the petroleum launch in the evening. The waves were constantly breaking into it and filling it. The gunwale was burst in at 2 places, and the heavy davits it hung on were twisted as if they had been copper wires. Only just in the nick of time, with the waves washing over us, some of us managed to get it lashed to the side of the ship. There seemed to be some fatality about this boat. Thursday, August 17th. Still beating eastward under sail and steam through scattered ice, and along a margin of fixed ice. Still blowing hard, with a heavy sea as soon as we headed a little out from the ice. Friday, August 18th. Continued storm. Stood southeast. At 4:30 a.m. Sverdrup, who had gone up into the crow's nest to look out for bears and walrus on the ice floes, saw land to the south of us. At 10 a.m. I went up to look at it. We were then probably not more than 10 miles away from it. It was low land, seemingly of the same formation as Hjalmar, with steep sandbanks and grass grown above. The sea grew shallower as we neared it. Not far from us small icebergs lay aground. The lead showed steadily less and less water. By 11:30 a.m. there were only some 8 fathoms. Then, to our surprise, the bottom suddenly fell to 20 fathoms, and after that we found steadily increasing depth. Between the land and the blocks of stranded ice on our lee there appeared to be a channel with rather deeper water and not so much ice aground in it. It seemed difficult to conceive that there should be undiscovered land here, where both Nordenskjold and Edward Johansen and possibly several Russians had passed without seeing anything. Our observations, however, were incontestable, and we immediately named the land Sverdrup's Island, after its discoverer. As there was still a great deal of ice to windward, we continued our southwesterly course, keeping as close to the wind as possible. The weather was clear, and at 8 o'clock we sighted the mainland, with Dixon's Island ahead. It had been our intention to run in and anchor here, in order to put letters for home under a cairn, Captain Wiggins having promised to pick them up on his way to Yenisei. But in the meantime the wind had fallen. It was a favorable chance, and time was precious, so gave up sending our post, and continued our course along the coast. The country here was quite different from Hjalmar. Though not very high, it was a hilly country, with patches and even large drifts of snow here and there, some of them lying close down by the shore. Next morning I sighted the southernmost of the Kameni Islands. We took a tack in under it to see if there were animals of any kind, but could catch sight of none. The island rose evenly from the sea at all points, with steep shores. They consisted for the most part of rock, which was partly solid, partly broken up by the action of the weather into heaps of stones. It appeared to be a stratified rock, with strongly marked oblique strata. The island was also covered with quantities of gravel, sometimes mixed with larger stones. The whole of the northern point seemed to be a sand heap, with steep sand banks toward the shore. The most noticeable feature of the island was its marked shore lines. Near the top there was a specially pronounced one, which was like a sharp ledge on the west and north sides, and stretched across the island like a dark band. Nearer the beach were several other distinct ones. In form they all resembled the upper one with its steep ledges, and had evidently been formed in the same way by the action of the sea, and more especially of the ice. Like the upper one, they also were most marked on the west and north sides of the island, which are those facing most to the open sea. To the student of the history of the earth, these marks of the former level of the sea are of great interest, showing as they do that the land has risen or the sea sunk since the time they were formed. Like Scandinavia, the whole of the north coast of Siberia has undergone these changes of level since the great ice age. It was strange that we saw none of the islands which, according to Nordenskjöld's map, stretch in a line to the northeast from the Kameni Island. On the other hand, I took the bearings of one or two other islands lying almost due east, and next morning we passed a small island farther north. We saw a few birds in this neighborhood, only a few flocks of geese, some Arctic gulls, Lestris parasitica and L. buffoni, and a few seagulls and tern. On Sunday, August 20th, we had for us uncommonly fine weather, blue sea, brilliant sunshine, and light wind, still from the northeast. In the afternoon we ran into the Chelman Islands. These we could recognize from their position on Nordenskjöld's map, but south of them we found many unknown ones. They all had smoothly rounded forms, these Chelman Islands, like rocks that have been ground smooth by the glaciers of the Ice Age. The Fram anchored on the north side of the largest of them, and whilst the boiler was being refitted, some of us went ashore in the evening for some shooting. We had not left the ship when the mate from the crow's nest caught sight of reindeer. At once we were all agog, every one wanted to go ashore, and the mate was quite beside himself with the hunter's fever, his eyes as big as saucers, and his hands trembling as though he were drunk. Not until we were in the boat had we time to look seriously for the mate's reindeer. We looked in vain. Not a living thing was to be seen in any direction. Yes, when we were close inshore, we at last descried a large flock of geese waddling upward from the beach. We were base enough to let a conjecture escape us that these were the mate's reindeer, a suspicion which he at first rejected with contempt. Gradually, however, his confidence oozed away. But it is possible to do an injustice even to a mate. The first thing I saw when I sprang ashore was old reindeer tracks. The mate had now the laugh on his side, ran from track to track, and swore that it was reindeer he had seen. When we got up on to the first height, we saw several reindeer on flat ground to the south of us. But the wind being from the north, we had to go back and make our way south along the shore till we got to leeward of them. The only one who did not approve of this plan was the mate, who was in a state of feverish eagerness to rush straight at some reindeer he thought he had seen to the east, which of course was an absolutely certain way to clear the field of every one of them. He asked and received permission to remain behind with Nansen, who was to take a magnetic observation, but had to promise not to move till he got the order. On the way along the shore we passed one great flock of geese after another. They stretched their necks and waddled aside a little, until we were quite near, and only then took flight. But we had no time to waste on such small game. A little further on we caught sight of one or two reindeer we had not noticed before. We could easily have stalked them, but were afraid of getting to windward of the others which were farther south. At last we got to leeward of these latter also, but they were grazing on flat ground, and it was anything but easy to stalk them, not a hillock, not a stone to hide behind. The only thing was to form a long line, advance as best we could, and, if possible, outflank them. In the meantime we had caught sight of another herd of reindeer farther to the north, but suddenly, to our astonishment, saw them tear off across the plain eastward, in all probability startled by the mate, who had not been able to keep quiet any longer. A little to the north of the reindeer nearest us there was a hollow opening from the shore, from which it seemed that it might be possible to get a shot at them. I went back to try this, whilst the others kept their places in the line. As I went down again towards the shore, I had the sea before me, quiet and beautiful. The sun had gone down behind it not long before, and the sky was glowing in the clear light night. I had to stand still for a minute. In the midst of all this beauty, man was doing the work of a beast of prey. At this moment I saw to the north a dark speck move down the height where the mate and Nansen ought to be. It divided into two, and the one moved east, just to the windward of the animals I was to stalk. They would get the scent immediately and be off. There was nothing for it but to hurry on, while I rained anything but good wishes on these fellows' heads. The gully was not so deep as I had expected. Its sides were just high enough to hide me when I crept on all fours. In the middle were large stones and clayey gravel, with the little runnels soaking through them. The reindeer were still grazing quietly, only now and then raising their heads to look around. My cover got lower and lower, and to the north I heard the mate. He would presently succeed in setting off my game. It was imperative to get on quickly, but there was no longer cover enough for me to advance on hands and knees. My only chance was to wriggle forward like a snake on my stomach. But in this soft clay, in the bed of the stream, yes, meat is too precious on board, and the beast of prey is too strong in a man. My clothes must be sacrificed. On I crept on my stomach through the mud. But soon there was hardly cover enough even for this. I squeezed myself flat among the stones and ploughed forward like a drain-cutting machine, and I did make way, if not quickly and comfortably, still surely. All this time the sky was turning darker and darker red behind me, and it was getting more and more difficult to use the sights of my gun, not to mention the trouble I had in keeping the clay from them and from the muzzle. The reindeer still grazed quietly on. When they raised their heads to look around, I had to lie as quiet as a mouse, feeling the water trickling gently under my stomach. When they began to nibble the moss again, off I went through the mud. Presently I made the disagreeable discovery that they were moving away from me about as fast as I could move forward, and I had to redouble my exertions. But the darkness was getting worse and worse, and I had the mate to the north of me, and presently he would start them off. The outlook was anything but bright, either morally or physically. The hollow was getting shallower and shallower, so that I was hardly covered at all. I squeezed myself still deeper into the mud. A turn in the ground helped me forward to the next little height, and now they were right in front of me, within what I could have called easy range if it had been daylight. I tried to take aim, but could not see the bead on my gun. Man's fate is sometimes hard to bear. My clothes were dripping with wet clay, and after what seemed to me most meritorious exertions, here I was at the goal, unable to take advantage of my position. But now the reindeer moved down into a small depression. I crept forward a little way further as quickly as I could. I was in a splendid position, so far as I could tell in the dark, but I could not see the bead any better than before. It was impossible to get nearer, for there was only a smooth slope between us. There was no sense in thinking of waiting for light to shoot by. It was now midnight, and I had that terrible mate to the north of me. Besides, the wind was not to be trusted. I held the rifle up against the sky to see the bead clearly, and then lowered it on the reindeer. I did this once, twice, thrice. The bead was still far from clear, but all the same I thought I might hit, and pulled the trigger. The two deer gave a sudden start, looked round in astonishment, and bolted off a little way south. There they stood still again, and at this moment were joined by a third deer, which had been standing rather farther north. I fired off all the cartridges in the magazine, and all to the same good purpose. The creature started and moved off a little at each shot, and then trotted farther south. Presently they made another halt, to take a long, careful look at me, and I dashed off westward as hard as I could run, to turn them. Now they were off straight in the direction where some of my comrades ought to be. I expected every moment to hear shots and see one or two of the animals fall, but away they ambled southwards, quite unchecked. At last, far to the south, crack went a rifle. I could see by the smoke that it was at too long a range, so in high dudgeon I shouldered my rifle and lounged in the direction of the shot. It was pleasant to see such a good result for all one's trouble. No one was to be seen anywhere. At length I met Sverdrup. It was he who had fired. Soon Blessing joined us, but all the others had long since left their posts. Whilst Blessing went back to the boat in his botanizing box, Sverdrup and I went on to try our luck once more. A little farther south we came to a valley stretching right across the island. On the further side of it we saw a man standing on a hillock, and not far from him a herd of 5 or 6 reindeer. As it never occurred to us to doubt that the man was in the act of stalking these, we avoided going in that direction, and soon he and his reindeer disappeared to the west. I heard afterwards that he had never seen the deer. As it was evident that when the reindeer to the south of us were startled, they would have to come back across this valley, and as the island at this part was so narrow that we commanded the whole of it, we determined to take up our posts here and wait. We accordingly got in the lee of some great boulders out of the wind. In front of Sverdrup was a large flock of geese near the mouth of the stream, close down by the shore. They kept up an incessant gabble, and the temptation to have a shot at them was very great. But considering the reindeer, we thought it best to leave them in peace. They gabbled and waddled away down through the mud, and soon took wing. The time seemed long. At first we listened with all our ears. The reindeer must come very soon, and our eyes wandered incessantly back and forwards along the slope on the other side of the valley. But no reindeer came, and soon we were having a struggle to keep our eyes open and our heads up. We had not had much sleep the last few days. They must be coming. We shook ourselves awake and gave another look along the bank, till again the eyes softly closed and the heads began to nod, while the chill wind blew through our wet clothes, and I shivered with cold. This sort of thing went on for an hour or two, until the sport began to pall on me, and I scrambled from my shelter along towards Sverdrup, who was enjoying it about as much as I was. We climbed the slope on the other side of the valley, and were hardly at the top before we saw the horns of 6 splendid reindeer on a height in front of us. They were restless, scenting westward, trotting round in a circle and then sniffing again. They could not have noticed us as yet, as the wind was blowing at right angles to the line between them and us. We stood a long time watching their manoeuvres and waiting their choice of a direction, but they had apparently great difficulty in making it. At last off they swung south and east, and off we went southeast as hard as we could go to get across their course before they got scent of us. Sverdrup had got well ahead, and I saw him rushing across a flat piece of ground. Presently he would be at the right place to meet them. I stopped, to be in readiness to cut them off on the other side if they should face about and make off northward again. There were 6 splendid animals, a big buck in front. They were heading straight for Sverdrup, who was now crouching down on the slope. I expected every moment to see the foremost fall. A shot rang out. Round wheeled the whole flock like lightning, and back they came at a gallop. It was my turn now to run with all my might, and off I went over the stones, down towards the valley we had come from. I only stopped once or twice to take breath, and to make sure that the animals were coming in the direction I had reckoned on, then off again. We were getting near each other now. They were coming on just where I had calculated. The thing now was to be in time for them. I made my long legs go their fastest over the boulders, and took leaps from stone to stone that would have surprised myself at a more sober moment. More than once my foot slipped, and I went down head first among the boulders, gun and all. But the wild beast in me had the upper hand now. The passion of the chase vibrated through every fibre of my body. We reached the slant of the valley almost at the same time. A leap or two to get up on some big boulders, and the moment had come. I must shoot, though the shot was a long one. When the smoke cleared away, I saw the big buck trailing a broken hind leg. When their leader stopped, the whole flock turned and ran in a ring round the poor animal. They could not understand what was happening, and strayed about wildly with the balls whistling round them. Then off they went down the side of the valley again, leaving another of their number behind with a broken leg. I tore after them across the valley and up the other side, in the hope of getting another shot, but gave that up and turned back to make sure of the 2 wounded ones. At the bottom of the valley stood one of the victims awaiting its fate. It looked imploringly at me, and then, just as I was going forward to shoot it, made off much quicker than I could have thought possible for an animal on 3 legs to go. Sure of my shot, of course, I missed, and now began a chase, which ended in the poor beast, blocked in every other direction, rushing down towards the sea and wading into a small lagoon on the shore, whence I feared it might get right out into the sea. At last it got its quietus there in the water. The other one was not far off, and a ball soon put an end to its sufferings also. As I was proceeding to rip it up, Henriksen and Johansen appeared. They had just shot a bear a little further south. After disemboweling the reindeer, we went towards the boat again, meeting Sverdrup on the way. It was now well on in the morning, and I considered that we had already spent too much time here. I was impatient to push northwards. Whilst Sverdrup and some of the others went on board to get ready for the start, the rest of us rowed south to fetch our 2 reindeer and our bear. A strong breeze had begun to blow from the northeast, and as it would be hard work for us to row back against it, I had asked Sverdrup to come and meet us with the Fram, if the soundings permitted of his doing so. We saw quantities of seal and whitefish along the shore, but we had not time to go after them. All we wanted now was to get south, and in the first place to pick up the bear. When we came near the place where we expected to find it, we did see a large white heap resembling a bear lying on the ground, and I was sure it must be the dead one, but Henriksen maintained that it was not. We went ashore and approached it, as it lay motionless on a grassy bank. I still felt a strong suspicion that it had already had all the shot it wanted. We drew nearer and nearer, but it gave no sign of life. I looked into Henriksen's honest face to make sure that they were not playing a trick on me, but he was staring fixedly at the bear. As I looked, 2 shots went off, and to my astonishment the great creature bounded into the air, still dazed with sleep. Poor beast! It was a harsh awakening. Another shot, and it fell lifeless. We first tried to drag the bears down to the boat, but they were too heavy for us, and we now had a hard piece of work skinning and cutting them up and carrying down all we wanted. But bad as it was, trudging through the soft clay with heavy quarters of bear on our backs, there was worse awaiting us on the beach. The tide had risen, and at the same time the waves had got larger and swamped the boat and were now breaking over it. Guns and ammunition were soaking in the water, bits of bread, our only provision, floated round, and the butter dish lay at the bottom with no butter in it. It required no small exertion to get the boat drawn up out of this heavy surf and emptied of water. Luckily it had received no injury, as the beach was of soft sand, but the sand had penetrated with the water everywhere, even into the most delicate parts of the locks of our rifles. But worst of all was the loss of our provisions, for now we were ravenously hungry. We had to make the best of a bad business, and eat pieces of bread soaked in sea-water and flavored with several varieties of dirt. On this occasion, too, I lost my sketch-book, with some sketches that were of value to me. It was no easy task to get our heavy game into the boat with these big waves breaking on the flat beach. We had to keep the boat outside the surf, and haul both skins and flesh on board with a line. A good deal of water came with them, but there was no help for it, and then we had to row north along the shore against the wind and sea as hard as we could. It was very tough work. The wind had increased, and it was all we could do to make headway against it. Seals were diving round us, white whales coming and going, but we had no eyes for them now. Suddenly Henriksen called out that there was a bear on the point in front. I turned round, and there stood a beautiful white fellow rummaging among the flotsam on the beach. As we had no time to shoot it, we rowed on, and it went slowly in front of us northwards along the shore. At last, with great exertions, we reached the bay where we were to put in for the reindeer. The bear was there before us. It had not seen the boat hitherto, but now it got scent of us and came nearer. It was a tempting shot. I had my finger on the trigger several times, but did not draw it. After all, we had no use for the animal. It was quite as much as we could do to stow away what we had already. It made a beautiful target of itself by getting up on a stone to have a better scent, and looked about, and after a careful survey it turned round and set off inland at an easy trot. The surf was by this time still heavier. It was a flat, shallow shore, and the waves broke a good way out from land. We rowed in till the boat touched ground, and the breakers began to wash over us. The only way of getting ashore was to jump into the sea and wade. But getting the reindeer on board was another matter. There was no better landing place farther north, and hard as it was to give up the excellent meat after all our trouble, it seemed to me there was nothing else for it, and we rowed off towards our ship. It was the hardest row I ever had a hand in. It went pretty well to begin with. We had the current with us, and got quickly out from land. But presently the wind rose, the current slackened, and wave after wave broke over us. After incredible toil, we had at last only a short way to go. I cheered up the good fellows as best I could, reminding them of the smoking hot tea that awaited them after a few more tough pulls, and picturing all the good things in store for them. We really were all pretty well done up now, but we still took a good grip of the oars, soaking wet as we were from the sea constantly breaking over us, for of course none of us had thought of such things as oilskins in yesterday's beautiful weather. But we soon saw that with all our pulling and toiling, the boat was making no headway whatever. Apart from the wind and the sea, we had the current dead against us here. All our exertions were of no avail. We pulled till our finger-tips felt as if they were bursting. But the most we could manage was to keep the boat where it was. If we slackened an instant it drifted back. I tried to encourage my comrades. Now we made a little way. It was just strength that was needed. But all to no purpose. The wind whistled round our ears, and the spray dashed over us. It was maddening to be so near the ship that it seemed as if we could almost reach out to her, and yet feel that it was impossible to get on any farther. We had to go in under the land again, where we had the current with us, and here we did succeed in making a little progress. We rowed hard till we were about abreast of the ship. Then we once more tried to sheer across to her, but no sooner did we get into the current again than it mercilessly drove us back. Beaten again. And again we tried the same maneuver with the same result. Now we saw them lowering a buoy from the ship. If we could only reach it, we were saved, but we did not reach it. They were not exactly blessings that we poured on those on board. Why on earth could they not bear down to us when they saw the straits we were in? Or why, at any rate, could they not ease up the anchor, and let the ship drift a little in our direction? They saw how little was needed to enable us to reach them. Perhaps they had their reasons. We would make one last desperate attempt. We went at it with a will. Every muscle was strained to the utmost. It was only the buoy we had to reach this time. But to our rage we now saw the buoy being hauled up. We rowed a little way on to the windward of the Fram, and then tried again to sheer over. This time we got nearer her than we had ever been before, but we were disappointed in still seeing no buoy, and none was thrown over. There was not even a man to be seen on deck. We roared like madmen for a buoy. We had no strength left for another attempt. It was not a pleasing prospect to have to drift back and go ashore again in our wet clothes. We would get on board. Once more we yelled like wild Indians, and now they came rushing aft and threw out the buoy in our direction. One more cry to my mates that we must put our last strength into the work. There were only a few boat lengths to cover, and we bent to our oars with a will. Now there were 3 boat lengths. Another desperate spurt. Now there were 2½ boat lengths, presently 2, then only 1. A few more frantic pulls, and there was a little less. Now, boys, 1 or 2 more hard pulls and it's over. Hard, hard. Keep to it. Now another. Don't give up. 1 more. There we have it. And one joyful sigh of relief passed round the boat. Keep the oars going, or the rope will break. Row, boys. And row we did, and soon they had hauled us alongside of the Fram. Not till we were lying there getting our bearskins and flesh hauled on board did we really know what we had had to fight against. The current was running along the side of the ship like a rapid river. At last we were actually on board. It was evening by this time, and it was splendid to get some good hot food, and then stretch one's limbs in a comfortable dry berth. There is a satisfaction in feeling that one has exerted oneself to some purpose. Here was the net result of 24 hours' hard toil. We had shot 2 reindeer, which we did not get, got 2 bears that we had no use for, and had totally ruined 1 suit of clothes. 2 washings had not the smallest effect on them, and they hung on deck to air for the rest of this trip. I slept badly that night, for this is what I find in my diary. Got on board after what I think was the hardest row I ever had. Slept well for a little, but am now lying, tossing about in my berth, unable to sleep. Is it the coffee I drank after supper, or the cold tea I drank when I awoke with a burning thirst? I shut my eyes and try again time after time, but to no purpose. And now memory's airy vision steals softly over my soul. Gleam after gleam breaks through the mist. I see before me sunlit landscapes, smiling fields and meadows, green leafy trees and woods, and blue mountain ridges. The singing of the steam in the boiler pipe turns to bell-ringing, church bells, ringing in Sabbath peace over Vesteracker on this beautiful summer morning. I am walking with father along the avenue of small birch trees that mother planted, up towards the church which lies on the height before us, pointing up into the blue sky and sending its call far over the countryside. From up there you can see a long way. Nansen looks quite close in the clear air, especially on an autumn morning. And we give a quiet Sunday greeting to the people that drive past us, all going our way. What a look of Sunday happiness dwells on their faces! I did not think it all so delightful then, and would much rather have run off to the woods with my bow and arrow after squirrels. But now how fair, how wonderfully beautiful that sunlit picture seems to me! The feeling of peace and happiness that even then no doubt made its impression, though only a passing one, comes back now with redoubled strength, and all nature seems one mighty, thrilling song of praise. Is it because of the contrast with this poor, barren, sunless land of mists, without a tree, without a bush, nothing but stones and clay? No peace in it either, nothing but an endless struggle to get north, always north, without a moment's delay. Oh, how one yearns for a little careless happiness! Next day we were ready again to sail, and I tried to force the Fram on under steam against wind and current. But the current ran strong as a river, and we had to be specially careful with the helm. If we gave her the least thing too much, she would take a sheer, and we knew there were shallows and rocks on all sides. We kept the lead going constantly. For a time all went well, and we made way slowly. But suddenly she took a sheer and refused to obey her helm. She went off to starboard. The lead indicated shallow water. The same moment came the order, "Let go the anchor," and to the bottom it went with a rush and a clank. There we lay with 4 fathoms of water under the stern, and 9 fathoms in front at the anchor. We were not a moment too soon. We got the Fram's head straight to the wind and tried again time after time, but always with the same result. The attempt had to be given up. There was still the possibility of making our way out of the Sound to leeward of the land, but the water got quickly shallow there, and we might come on rocks at any moment. We could have gone on in front with the boat and sounded, but I had already had more than enough of rowing in that current. For the present we must stay where we were, and anoint ourselves with the ointment called patience, a medicament of which every polar expedition ought to lay in a large supply. We hoped on for a change, but the current remained as it was, and the wind certainly did not decrease. I was in despair at having to lie here for nothing but this cursed current, with open sea outside, perhaps as far as Cape Chelyuskin, that eternal cape whose name had been sounding in my ears for the last 3 weeks. When I came on deck next morning, August 23rd, winter had come. There was white snow on the deck, and on every little projection of the rigging where it had found shelter from the wind, white snow on the land, and white snow floating through the air. Oh, how the snow refreshes one's soul, and drives away all the gloom and sadness from this sullen land of fogs. Look at it scattered so delicately, as if by a loving hand, over the stones and the grass-flats on shore. But wind and current are much as they were, and during the day the wind blows up to a regular storm, howling and rattling in the Fram's rigging. The following day, August 24th, I had quite made up my mind that we must get out some way or other. When I came on deck in the morning, the wind had gone down considerably, and the current was not so strong. A boat would almost be able to row against it. Anyhow, one could be eased away by a line from the stern, and keep on taking soundings there, while we kedged the Fram with her anchor just clear of the bottom. But before having recourse to this last expedient, I would make another attempt to go against the wind and the current. The engineers were ordered to put on as much pressure of steam as they dared, and the Fram was urged on at her top speed. Our surprise was not small when we saw that we were making way, and even at a tolerable rate. Soon we were out of the Sound, or nipper, as we christened it, and could beat out to sea with steam and sail. Of course we had, as usual, contrary wind and thick weather. There is ample space between every little bit of sunshine in these quarters. Next day we kept on beating northward between the edge of the ice and the land. The open channel was broad to begin with, but farther north it became so narrow that we could often see the coast when we put about at the edge of the ice. At this time we passed many unknown islands and groups of islands. There was evidently plenty of occupation here for anyone who could spare the time in making a chart of the coast. Our voyage had another aim, and all that we could do was to make a few occasional measurements of the same nature as Nordenskjöld had made before us. On August 25th I noted in my diary that in the afternoon we had 7 islands in sight. They were higher than those we had seen before, and consisted of precipitous hills. There were also small glaciers or snowfields, and the rock formations showed clear traces of erosion by ice or snow, this being especially the case on the largest island, where there were even small valleys partially filled with snow. This is the record of August 26th. Many new islands in various directions. There are here, the diary continues, any number of unknown islands, so many that one's head gets confused in trying to keep account of them all. In the morning we passed a very rocky one, and beyond it I saw 2 others. After them, land or islands farther to the north and still more to the northeast. We had to go out of our course in the afternoon, because we dared not pass between two large islands on account of possible shoals. The islands were round in form like those we had seen farther back, but were of a good height. Now we held east again, with 4 biggish islands and 2 islets in the offing. On our other side we presently had a line of flat islands with steep shores. The channel was far from safe here. In the evening we suddenly noticed large stones standing up above the water among some ice floes close on our port bow, and on our starboard beam was a shoal with stranded ice floes. We sounded, but found over 21 fathoms of water. I think this will suffice to give an idea of the nature of this coast. Its belt of skerries, though it certainly cannot be classed with the Norwegian one, is yet of the kind that it would be difficult to find except off glacier-formed coasts. This tends to strengthen the opinion I had formed of there having been a glacial period in the earlier history of this part of the world also. Of the coast itself, we unfortunately saw too little at any distance from which we could get an accurate idea of its formation and nature. We could not keep near land, partly because of the thick weather, and partly because of the number of islands. The little I did see was enough to give me the conviction that the actual coastline differs essentially from the one we know from maps. It is much more winding and indented than it is shown to be. I even, several times, thought that I saw the openings into deep fjords, and more than once the suspicion occurred to me that this was a typical fjord country we were sailing past, in spite of the hills being comparatively low and rounded. In this supposition I was to be confirmed by our experiences farther north. Our record of August 27th reads as follows. Steamed among a variety of small islands and islets. Thick fog in the morning. At 12 noon we saw a small island right ahead, and therefore changed our course and went north. We were soon close to the ice, and after 3 in the afternoon held northeast along its edge. Sighted land when the fog cleared a little, and were about a mile off it at 7 p.m. It was the same striated, rounded land, covered with clay and large and small stones strewn over moss and grass flats. Before us we saw points and headlands, with islands outside and sounds and fjords between. But it was all locked up in ice, and we could not see far for the fog. There was that strange Arctic hush and misty light over everything, that grayish-white light caused by the reflection from the ice being cast high into the air against masses of vapor, the dark land offering a wonderful contrast. We were not sure whether this was the land near Timor Sound, or that by Cape Hollander, but were agreed that in any case it would be best to hold a northerly course, so as to keep clear of Almquist's Islands, which Nordenskjöld marks on his map as lying off Timor Island. If we shaped our course for 1 watch north, or north to west, we should be safe after that and be able again to hold farther east. But we miscalculated after all. At midnight we turned northeastward, and at 4 a.m., August 28th, land appeared out of the fog about half a mile off. It seemed to Sverdrup, who was on deck, the highest that we had seen since we left Norway. He consequently took it to be the mainland, and wished to keep well outside of it, but was obliged to turn from this course because of ice. We held to the west-southwest, and it was not till 9 a.m. that we rounded the western point of a large island and could steer north again. East of us were many islands or points with solid ice between them, and we followed the edge of the ice. All the morning we went north along the land against a strong current. There seemed to be no end to this land. Its discrepancy with every known map grew more and more remarkable, and I was in no slight dilemma. We had for long been far to the north of the most northern island indicated by Nordenskjöld. My diary this day tells of great uncertainty. This land, or these islands, or whatever it is, goes confoundedly far north. If it is a group of islands, they are tolerably large ones. It has often the appearance of connected land with fjords and points, but the weather is too thick for us to get a proper view. Can this that we are now coasting along be the Timor Island of the Russian maps, or more precisely Laptev's map, and is it separated from the mainland by the broad strait indicated by him, whilst Nordenskjold's Timor Island is what Laptev has mapped as a projecting tongue of land? This supposition would explain everything, and our observations would also fit in with it. Is it possible that Nordenskjold found this strait and took it for Timor Strait, whilst in reality it was a new one, and that he saw Almquist's islands, but had no suspicion that Timor Island lay to the outside of them? The difficulty about this explanation is that the Russian maps mark no islands round Timor Island. It is inconceivable that anyone should have travelled all about here in sledges without seeing all these small islands that lie scattered around. In the afternoon the water gauge of the boiler got choked up. We had to stop to have it repaired, and therefore made fast to the edge of the ice. We spent the time in taking in drinking water. We found a pool on the ice, so small that we thought it would only do to begin with. But it evidently had a subterranean communication with other freshwater ponds on the floe. To our astonishment, it proved inexhaustible, however much we scooped. In the evening we stood in to the head of an ice bay, which opened out opposite the most northern island we then had in sight. There was no passage beyond. The broken drift ice lay packed so close in on the unbroken land ice that it was impossible to tell where the one ended and the other began. We could see islands still farther to the northeast. From the atmosphere it seemed as if there might also be open water in that direction. To the north it all looked very close, but to the west there was an open waterway as far as one could see from the masthead. I was in some doubt as to what should be done. There was an open channel for a short way up past the north point of the nearest island, but farther to the east the ice seemed to be close. It might be possible to force our way through there, but it was just as likely that we should be frozen in, so I thought it more judicious to go back and make another attempt between these islands and that mainland, which I had some difficulty in believing that Sverdrup had seen in the morning. End of File 7.